Today I want to invite you into my kitchen to make maple butter cake with me. This is a pretty simple recipe. This is one that I found recently from a cookbook that my granny gave me. I was flipping through the pages and I thought, that looks pretty good, it looks pretty easy. I was also interested to see if I can make it gluten-free. Now I don't have celiac disease or anything like that, but I discovered years ago in my early teens if I limited or avoided gluten, I just felt a lot better. So I tend to do a lot of gluten-free cooking. I showed a piece of this cake in one of my latest Eat Supper With Me videos and I got a lot of interest about it, so I wanted to make a video about it, and of course I will leave all the recipe information in the description below. I'll give you a little peek at the recipe before I show you how to cook it. One thing I really liked about this recipe is it doesn't have any artificial flavors, colors, preservatives, anything like that. Whether I'm cooking dessert or cooking something else, I really hate to see recipes that use artificial ingredients because they're just really bad for you, and it's just not necessary when you can just use basic ingredients like flour, sugar, butter, half and half, or milk. So I was happy to find that this recipe was just simple. First off, I have already preheated the oven to 350 degrees. The next thing I'm going to do is make the crust. So I'm going to take a cup of flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and some cinnamon. And we're going to mix those together, and then we're going to cut the cold butter into the mixture to make this crust. I like to use this gluten-free flour. There's lots of different flours, but it is all-purpose. So I've got this flour. This is the kind of sugar that I like to use, but you could also just use regular white sugar if you wanted to. We're going to do 3 tablespoons. This serving size that I'm making is for 12 servings. The recipe actually has 12 servings and 24, but I'm making it for 12. Got half a teaspoon of cinnamon. This is 5 1/3 tablespoons of butter. I'm just going to cut it into pieces. You want it to be cold butter. This is a little bit warmer than cold because I just come from the grocery store, but I think this would be fine. The recipe calls for a pastry blender, and that probably would be easier, but I actually don't have one of those, so I'm just going to use the tines of a fork. And you're basically just mashing it together until it gets crumbly. I almost forgot, I like to add a little bit of baking powder because since this is gluten-free, sometimes gluten-free stuff can tend to be really dense, and I think this baking powder helps with that. So I like to just add a teaspoon of baking powder to the whole recipe, but I will half that up between this step and the next step of this recipe. So half a teaspoon of baking powder. I really should have already put that in, but we'll go ahead and mix it in. Now we're going to go ahead and grease the pan. This is a 9-inch baking pan. I like to just grease with butter. This butter may be too soft, we'll see. It's easiest to just kind of unwrap it and just send it around the whole pan. Go ahead and pour the crust in. It's easiest if you try to get it even to start with. If not, you'll have to chase it all around the pan trying to pat it out. So I try to get it evenly before I start mashing it down. And then you just start pressing it in. When I made this the first time, I thought, this stuff seems way too crumbly. There's no way that this is going to form a crust, but it will. We're going to bake this for about 5 minutes, but you want to watch this. You don't want to walk away because we want this to where it's just set. You don't want it to get super cooked. We're just trying to get it set so when we pour the next mixture on, it's not going to seep through. I want to show you something. I've just pulled this out of the oven. So what you're looking for is the top to be hard. So if you just take something like this, you see how that looks hard? It doesn't look gooey. But then right over here in this corner, I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a tiny bit gooey, and that's just some of that butter. But what you want is for it to be hard like that. So that way you know it's set. Of course, you don't want to overcook this because we're about to put in the next mixture and cook it for a while. But we're just looking for that, just a little bit of hardness. This is 3/4 of a cup butter or 12 tablespoons, however you want to look at it. Sometimes I count in tablespoons when you've got it in a stick like this. So we're going to beat this butter just until it's soft, about 30 seconds or so. I'm sure you could do this in a stand mixer, but a hand mixer will work just fine as well. Now we're going to add the rest of our sugar, which is 3/4 of a cup, and we're going to beat them until they're combined. Of course, as always, it's good to stop and scrape down the sides. Make sure you're getting it mixed well. Now we're going to beat in an egg and some maple syrup. The maple syrup might be the only drawback to this recipe because it can be somewhat expensive. I'm going to go ahead and use the rest of this just because it's open. This comes from Walmart, but if you have an Aldi's nearby you, this comes from Aldi's, and I can't remember off the top of my head how much it costs, but it's a good price. And we want 2/3 of a cup. Looks like I'll have to use both. I typically have maple syrup on hand anyway. We don't usually eat a lot of pancakes or waffles, but if we do, we prefer maple syrup instead, and then it is really good to bake with as an alternative to more processed sugars. So, alright, we'll finish it off here. Now we'll mix this together. Now we're going to slowly and alternately add the rest of our flour and a 1/2 cup of 1/2 and 1/2. I like to just add a little bit of each and then mix and just slowly do that until I've got them all added. One more thing, y'all, I'm almost going to forget it again. We need that 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. We're going to go ahead and add that. You could have added that to your flour mix. It really doesn't matter when you add it, just as long as you do. This is a batter that you don't want to overmix, so be careful of that. And now we'll just pour the batter over the crust. I try to get it as spread out evenly as I can. Helps to give it a good shake. Now we're going to bake this in the oven for about 35 minutes or until the cake is almost firm when you shake it. That's how you tell if this cake is done. Even if the top part looks brown, you want to just take it out of the oven and just gently give it a shake. And when it's firm and you can't really see any movement anymore, then you know it's done. I wanted you to see what it looks like once it's done. It's going to brown up pretty nice, and then see how when you shake it, really nothing moves anymore. So that's how you know it's done. You can see it pulling away from the edges quite nicely. That butter definitely works as a good greaser for the pan. This recipe does call for cooling on a wire rack, just so the bottom of the pan is going to be able to get some air and it will cool evenly. So I'm going to let this sit here for a while, and then I'll come back, cut it, and we'll see how it tastes. I've let this cool as long as I can stand it, and now I want to try a piece. So the texture turns out really nice. You can see that hard crust on the bottom there, but you can see that the center is really kind of gooey and fluffy. So now we're gonna go ahead and taste test this. This is truly yummy, folks. It's really good. The top of it gets like slightly kind of hard and crusty, and then of course you got the crust on the bottom, and then between there it's just so light and fluffy. So it just makes for a really tasty dessert, and it's very versatile. If you wanted to add ice cream, you could, fresh fruit, you could make whipped cream with this, you could make some kind of icing to put across the top. You could also just put a little bit of maple syrup and powdered sugar on there. That's what the recipe called for. But you can also just eat it plain, and it's pretty good just by itself. You can definitely taste the maple flavoring, but I wouldn't say that it's super overpowering by any means. And again, I know I've already said it, but the texture of this really is kind of fluffy, and that surprised me when I first made it, because gluten-free stuff can tend to be just like really dense or gritty and kind of gross. But this actually turns out really good with the gluten-free flour. I'm gonna set this down, or else I could eat the whole thing right now. So drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Again, I'll leave the full recipe in the description below. I always love reading comments. I appreciate you watching and spending some time with me today in my kitchen. God bless you, God keep you, and I'll see you on the next video.